I welcome you back to our continuing study in the Gospel of Matthew. We find ourselves in this next unit in Matthew chapter 23. I'm going to read verses 5 to 7, and I'm going to be reading out of the Amplified New Testament. Matthew chapter 23 and verse 5. They do their works to be seen by men, for they make wide their phylacteries, small cases and enclosing certain scripture passages worn during prayer on left arm and forehead, and make their fringes worn long, worn by all male Israelites according to the command. Numbers 15:38, Exodus 13:9, Deuteronomy 6:8. And they take pleasure in and thus love the place of honor in feasts and the best seats in the synagogue, and to be greeted with honor in the marketplace, and to have people call them rabbi. The reality of who we are as human beings does not change the moment we cross the threshold and enter into the church. Behaviors that occur outside the church do not simply cease because we are in a church. It is not the structure of the church that changes behaviors. It is Jesus Christ and our relationship to him that can transform our behavior. It is not automatic, and it does not happen because we are in a church. Now, if you have walked with him for a while and are sincere in your faith, you'll see what I mean. And you will see what I said in the above in a certain light. You will know that there are people who are no different for being in the church, or in that sense have changed very little. We have to be honest about the shortcomings of the church and of ourselves when it comes to living transformed lives. The passage before us is written in a particular time and place for a particular set of issues. We could go through each of these and unpack what was going on historically. It would be interesting, but I do not think ultimately, in this case, it is necessary. We can read a passage like this and with a few tweaks make it apply to our own church or churches we know of. This is not a passage that is obsolete. You see, we not only have in the church people who are not living transformed lives, we also have people who see the church like the people in this passage. People who see the faith community and membership in it as a road to self-promotion. In other words, there are people out there in various churches and various places that use the church as a platform, a stage to strut their stuff and be something and someone. There are people who gravitate to certain positions and ministries in the church because they see that as a way of being something and someone. This is not to say that people, by necessity, because they're in that position, are there for that reason. So, for example, look at how we exalt Christian missions in the evangelical church. If you want stature and status in the church, identify with Christian missions. That doesn't mean that that person is going to necessarily be sincere or not sincere. The problem is that people will assume certain things because they're in that position. Again, think of worship leadership and worship music. There are people for whom the song side of the ministry of the church is important. That gives them stature and status. You see, what we're talking about is that there are people who use the church as a means to promote themselves. And clearly, we're talking about the institutional church. The institutional church is not the body of Christ. In particular, in this passage, we could say that Jesus was challenging the ministers of his day. Now, that in a sense is not, an exact fit, because the modern distinctions between clergy and laity was in the future. In the Judaism of the first century, you had the priest who served in the temple. The idea of the chief religious performer or leader as rabbi is a future development that is well in advance of the New Testament era. The destruction of the temple would allow for the emergence of the rabbi as the significant religious leader in Judaism. Rabbis were people who were zealous for the religious law. And we've kind of talked about this at different points, that the destruction of the temple in AD 70 would allow for the emergence of what we call the Pharisees as a dominant party in Judaism, to not only emerge, but actually survive out of the chaos, and they would morph into the rabbinic movement. Rabbis were people who were zealous for the religious law. They were people who could use their religiosity to gain stature in the local Jewish community. The danger is we end up with religious professionals, and then the rest are amateurs. In other words, a Christian pastor is not the professional Christian. He or she must be an example of faith, commitment, and humility. But Christian leadership is never achieved through title, position, or honors. And that has to be underscored here. You don't become a Christian leader because you have a certain position. No way. All Christians are hypocrites. The issue is whether we recognize it and whether we are seeking to do something about it. We are hypocrites because the nature of our faith calls us to aspire to something above and beyond what we are as human beings. And the life of faith calls us to a higher standard of living, while the fact is that we still remain human beings, marred by sin, with our own pettiness and our own desires at work in us. The danger is that the Christian life and the performance of various Christian duties can become a mask to hide our failings as individuals. We substitute a Christian veneer for a Christian vitality that comes from the acknowledgement of our sinfulness. We are reformed sinners who still need to be reformed. We do not mask that, nor do we revel in it. You see, we may all be practical hypocrites, but that does not mean we have to be practicing hypocrites.